questions we wrestle with as Christians about who God is, how do we live out our faith, what is the Bible, what is the truth of the Bible, what are we supposed to believe, how are we supposed to live? There are really big, deep questions that we ask each other, that we ask God, that we wrestle with ourselves. And that's why the Cultivate podcast exists, to help us go deeper in our understanding of who God is, His Word, and the way that He's called us to live. Hey everyone, welcome to the Cultivate podcast with the Grove Church. I'm Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there, and we have with us
Abigail Boone.
Oh, it was very similar.
I'm getting very subtle with it.
That's right. Like you're not mixing. I was like, she's gonna mix it up. But
no,
then you didn't.
On the way up here, I was thinking of all the different nicknames I've had throughout the years, and like there was one of my dad's friends called me Abigail, the only girl with 3 first names. It's pretty random, pretty weird.
Pretty random.
And then
That's
my
pretty small town Arkansas.
uncle always called me Gator, and so my whole dad's side of the family calls me Gator.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
If they called me hey Gator, what you doing?
I guess I want to ask you if you like that or not.
That's the one I mind the least, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. Better than Big Gale?
Yeah.
Yeah. I hate that one. It makes me mad. It makes me mad anytime you reference it. Anyways, Abigail Boone, podcast director, producer, creative director at the Grove.
All the things.
Good friend, great question asker. We talked a little bit about the NCAA tournament last time. By the time they listen to this,
who knows?
Either this is
outdated,
a commemoration of a great season,
right?
Or somewhere I am flying around like this is the best. Like, the happiest I've been.
I won't be able to get you for
in 30 years.
Yeah, I won't be able to get you for a podcast. For a while.
It's great. It's great recording these earlier because I'll be
you up.
completely.
Would you say we have had a good season?
Well, we have finished this season so well.
Okay.
I mean, you think about where we were when we were 0-5 in conference or 1-6 in conference. The fact that we even made the tournament was great.
Yeah.
Much less won a game, won 2 games.
Yeah.
One more game? 3 games? 4 games?
Speaking it into existence.
I don't know. So we are in the middle of systematic theology. We've been kind of doing this for a while. We'll do several weeks, and then we'll, on different topics, then we'll have to pause, do some Q&A. We've been doing this for a while. Currently now doing Christology, and we started that last week by talking about the deity of Jesus, and we talked about that there's some very specific times where Jesus is referred to as God, some very specific things that Jesus says that are all but saying it, the way that he receives worship, the attributes that he has. Paul describes him as God. The author of the Gospel of John says that he's God. Very, very direct references. And then we talked a little bit why that's important. Theologically, rather than, it's not more than just a curiosity. You know, we talk about the theology of the house, where it's like, is this something that is essential? Is it foundational? Is it just kind of important things that kind of build your house? Is it decorative? And it's as dirt gets. When we talk about, like I said, I mean, people ask me kind of what's the dirt? It's Jesus died for sins. And in order to really understand what that means, you got to understand who Jesus is. What does his death have to do with it?
And why do we need that? And
what is sin?
Yeah. And
then sin gets you who is God and what's your relationship to him.
Yeah.
And so
really?
who is Jesus? His very nature is what helps us understand his death and its significance, which leads us to this episode, which was Jesus a person? Now, you may think that is a strange question to ask, right? Because there he was.
Yeah.
People saw him. And so the way that we'll come at this is he clearly looked like a person.
Sure, yes.
But was he really a person, or was he God pretending to be a person?
Like an angel, kind of?
Yeah, just, could God right now, if he wanted to, come down in the shape of a donut and look like a donut, have all the qualities of donut, but he's not really a donut, right? Or the burning bush, really.
Okay.
God was in the burning bush. God wasn't in his very essence. He wasn't that bush.
Well, he was born.
He was in that bush. Not the bush. We're talking about the bush now.
No. I know, but Jesus was born. That's pretty human.
Was he? Right? I mean, like, all of this could have been an illusion.
Okay.
Because, and this is the interesting thing, we didn't talk about this last episode, but there were a lot of councils early on where bishops from all over where Christianity was known at that point would gather together in these important councils to kind of make sure we were unified amongst significant things. And one of the biggest ones was around who Jesus was, because there is what was referred to now as the Arian controversy, and not Arian like Nazis, right, but Arian like from a teacher named Arius, who was kind of a forerunner for the Jehovah's Witnesses, who we did reference last week, of believing that Jesus was just a dude. And when they got together, I mean, it was pretty well established up until that point. Everyone believed that Jesus was fully God.
Okay.
And they got together, and that guy Arius, I mean, he had some influence, and so it was a difficult thing. But really, up until that point, in those first few hundred years, as the church is trying to wrestle with, okay, like what was that? Like who was that? Mm-hmm. Like you're kind of hearing what the apostles are saying and hearing their reflections on it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years after Jesus goes back to heaven. One of the more significant questions that the church wrestled with was he really fully human?
Mm-hmm.
We, being
just accept it,
kind of more of a scientific people, it is more outrageous to us to think that a person could be fully God. Right. For them, it was more outrageous to think that someone could teach, be, and do the things that Jesus did,
right,
and have actually been human.
See, yes, because the amount of like celebrities on podcasts or historians or whatever that acknowledge that he was a real man, he just might not be God, right, is all over the place. Or right, people acknowledge the teachings of God, Jesus, but they don't think that he was God.
Right. And so that's why this probably in some ways will feel like the lesser of the significance of these two episodes, kind of back to back, where it's like, you feel like you have to make a case for the deity of Jesus. Well, I wouldn't say that there's anybody that we're speaking to right now who thinks, I think God was just pretending to be a man.
Right.
It's what the Gnostics would have said.
Okay.
And again, along with the Judaizers, and I would say the Gnostics were kind of the second in chronological order, the second and perhaps one of the biggest theological heresies that the church was trying to deal with. And one of them was really built around this idea that tangible physical bodies are in and of themselves evil, and that all that is really good is spiritual. Mm-hmm. And so God is great, and God would never put on a human body. He would never give himself a human body.
That's what makes him so cool.
That's what makes him so cool. And that is why this matters. Abigail, you've been killing it the last couple of episodes with
predicting your next step.
Amazing segues. Sometimes I get lost in whatever train of thought I'm in, and I need someone to give me a good segue.
That's what I'm here for.
Well done. So you've obviously already mentioned one of the most significant examples of showing that Jesus was not just pretending to be a person, but was actually a person in his birth. Mm-hmm. I mean, everything about the way that it is described post-conception, all seems very, very natural.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and also they're trying to keep him from a census, which is identifying human beings that are living.
What do you?
Weren't they fleeing a census? They didn't want him to be listed on a separate census?
Wow, no, they were not fleeing a census. They were going back to Joseph's hometown to be counted in the census.
Oh, okay.
They didn't start fleeing until Herod when the wise men told Herod that a king had been born in Bethlehem.
Okay.
They did not flee. They fled that. They fled assassination attempt, but they were not fleeing the census.
Okay.
Yeah, so the conception was something that the Holy Spirit did, but other than that, it just seems like that Mary was pregnant, got more pregnant, traveled to Bethlehem, and had a baby, and then the shepherds came and there was a baby.
Right.
I mean, was there anything about that makes you think that it was anything other than the normal progression that
a human
has.
Right.
And then, then he grew up to become a baby. And then Luke 2:52, you familiar with that verse?
He grew in stature.
He grew in 4 things.
I don't know if I know the
wisdom, stature, and in favor with God and with men.
Okay.
Which there's a lot to be said there, but all of that is very, very human. And this is why it's glad that we did this second, when it's really going to help launch us into the third one, was because if Jesus is fully God, then but he's also human, it makes sense that he would grow in stature. People get bigger. And it would grow, that he would grow in favor with people. The older he got, and I'm sure Jesus was pretty cool, people started to like him. They liked him more and more.
Really liked his furniture.
Okay.
Like, man, that Jesus makes a good rocking chair.
Carpenter jokes with Abigail Boone.
If he was man, he wouldn't have had to do
But
work.
growing in wisdom and growing in favor with God. How does God the Son grow in favor with God the Father? And how does God grow in wisdom? And so we'll switch more to that in the second one, where we talk about how these two things hold together. But that verse, Luke 2:52, overwhelmingly highlights the humanity of Jesus. It was essential that he grow in these things.
Was that around the time where he like goes missing as a kid? Because I feel like you also see like he wasn't born.
Yeah, so
the grown-up Jesus.
Yeah, so the stories we have are Jesus as a baby, Jesus at 8 days old getting kind of his blessing, like the circumcision, right? And then at 12 years old, when he was old enough to finally go to grown-up temple, they go to Jerusalem, and they're all heading back home to Nazareth, and he just,
classic Jesus.
Man, I mean, you think, Jesus never committed a sin, but man, you got to tell your mom. Come on, dude. Like that would have been a sin at my house.
Yeah.
If I just kind of held back to theologically debate the rabbis.
Yeah.
Certainly, I'd have gotten in trouble. Any of my kids would have gotten in trouble. And they're like, Jesus, like, bro, what? And he's
not just what he did, but he didn't tell his mom.
He didn't tell his mom.
Yeah.
And then his response is like, what else did you think I'd be doing? I'm hanging out at my dad's house. And you're like, okay, just get in the caravan, bro. Like I don't know. To me, again, I'm not the sinlessness of Jesus. I'm not trying to deny it, but that pushes the limits.
Oh yeah,
what we're
he was human enough to push his mom's buttons.
Something, which is another topic for another day. Is what do you think it was like to be Jesus's younger brother?
What was his name?
Any of them. Jude was one. James was one. Right. I mean, it's just like the expectations that mom had on kids is like, why can't you be more like your
right?
She's probably thinking, man, all these women I've known my whole life complain about how hard it is to raise a kid. My kid's great. What is wrong with
Worst thing that happens is that he wants to be at the temple too much.
Right, and then the second kid comes along and is like, what is this holy terror?
Right.
And I'm sure he's like, kid, just be like your brother.
Right,
I'm like, I'm gonna punch my brother in the face. And then you finally do punch your brother, and he turns the other cheek to you, and you're like,
come on, can't win.
All of that, joking aside, I mean, Jesus had a very normal human life. He had brothers. And so I guess where we were, birth, 8 days old. I guess around 2, we don't really hear much about him, but that's the story where the wise men come, and then they have to flee. Then at 12 years old in the temple. And the only thing that we have other than that, and this is after that, from 12 to we see him again somewhere around 30, and that 18 years is Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God. That's all we have.
Yeah.
And so, but that is the most humanizing statement that you could make, because someone who was God and was only pretending to be human in some way would not have done those. I guess the body that he had taken on would grow,
but it wouldn't.
But he would not have had to grow in wisdom or in favor with God.
Right.
The fact that he grew, that he even had the ability to grow in those areas, I think is kind of the definitive view of a statement of Jesus's humanity.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, this may be a huge stretch, but he worked, which was an identifying mark of humans at the fall.
Right.
And he worked. He had a job.
Yep.
Like, he didn't just like hang out because he was like a Levite that other people donated to him or something like that. Like, he had a job. He worked. He did the daily toil that it takes to be human.
And he needed to work because he would get hungry.
Right.
He got hungry. He would get thirsty. He needed to eat. He needed food. He needed food. He needed water. He needed things to drink. And so, again, it's not like memes where we're talking about people who aren't human. Like, oh, I enjoy human sustenance.
Right.
I must. Right. I mean, he would get thirsty. He was on the.
Just drags it behind his mouth.
He disappears it. He gets it right here and
then
evaporates it. I mean, so like even on the cross, he was asking for something to drink. He experienced pain.
Well, and he even asked Jesus or God if there's any other way.
Right.
Someone who is not human would be able to just bear through whatever because they wouldn't experience the pain that a human would.
He cried.
He mourned.
And one of the stories, actually, we'll spend some time talking about next episode. We're trying to figure out how to put these two things together. One of the most significant stories, I think, of that kind of show both of these natures that Jesus has together is the story of Jesus calming the storm, because it starts with them in the boat and Jesus is asleep in the bottom of the boat, which that's significant enough just to show his humanity.
He needed rest.
And they say that it was kind of this once in a generation storms. These are experienced sailors. And if there had been they would have been able to know that a storm was coming. So this storm came out of nowhere and was significant enough where these highly experienced sailors got really, really scared. Water is coming up over the boat, flooding the boat, and Jesus is still asleep. Have you ever been that tired?
No.
I mean, that's tired. That's very human. And then they finally wake him up and he's like, hey, storm, stop. And it stops. I mean, so just again, that just kind of
shows both
as
sides.
Human as human gets, and kind of this next level of miracle that makes them say, who is this dude that even the rain will listen to him? So,
well, it seems also that the devil believed he was human because he tempted him with human things in the desert. As if the devil didn't believe he was human, he wouldn't have used human tactics to fight with him.
Yeah. Bread.
Right.
Power. Right.
Those are all human attributes. If he was battling just a spiritual deity, I don't know what those temptations would have been, but they would have been things that were tempting to humans.
Yeah. And he was, to the best, I mean, at least during that season, he was just at one place at one time. And we start to see a little bit difference post-resurrection, his ability to kind of appear in rooms and things. But before that, I mean, he was like, if he wanted to go somewhere,
he himself had to go somewhere.
Get on a donkey or walk or get on a boat or something like that. And even to the point where there's this one verse, and again, we'll talk about this in the next episode, where they're asking him when he's going to come back again. And he says, only the Father knows that.
Yeah.
So at least at that moment in his life, there is one thing that Jesus didn't know. And so we're going to, how can you be fully God and not know everything? But how can you be fully human and know everything? So we'll talk about that more, how these two things go together next episode. But for right now, again, showing that he had real physical, mental limitations. He had to grow in wisdom. He had to grow in favor with God. There were some things that he didn't know, apparently, at least one thing that he didn't know. He needed food. He needed water. He showed very real human emotions, had very human reactions to things, even to the point to where he was asking God to do something different than what he did. I mean, God has emotions. And so the fact that Jesus had emotions isn't necessarily enough, but you see it coming out in what feels like a much more human way than we would imagine that God expressing emotions.
Right.
Which leads us to the big question.
Why does it matter?
Why does it matter?
Well, this is kind of what I was saying last time, but it's like the most relatable thing that God could have done. Not getting into the weeds of, is there any other way that he could have done this? But like, it matters that we have a figure that we can relate to, but see that he didn't do what we did with our humanity. He did something different. He did it perfectly. Mm-hmm. And so that sets a very clear example for us to see why he was the correct sacrifice that we needed.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this last episode where he, in order for his sacrifice to be significant enough, he had to be fully God. Mm-hmm. One dude can die for another dude, but one dude cannot die for the whole world.
Right.
But if he is not a person, mm-hmm. then what does his death even have to do with us? Mm-hmm. I mean, he's not in it.
Yeah.
He's not one. Like, how can he do? I mean, obviously, we talked about this in a meta, I kind of avoided it sort of way. Could he have done something different than what he did?
Right.
But based on the way that it is described, it is a mediation between two parties, mm-hmm. and someone who clearly represents both parties comes and has the divine nature that allows his sacrifice to be significant enough, but has a human nature where he can be one of us. Mm-hmm. I am a person dying for people, mm-hmm. And so bringing both of those natures together is kind of the thing that makes the gospel and his death on the cross make the most sense. I mean, it would be some really weird kind of abstract thing that happened, that this deity pretended to die on a cross.
Or if there's like a battle in the up there space that we're like, he told us that a battle went down between something. Also, does this not secondary as in it's not important, but maybe it matters that he fulfilled the scriptures that we're talking about him coming?
Yeah. I mean, there's a biblical, that's a kind of a more of a biblical answer. It's like, I mean, of course he fulfilled these prophecies, and there's some really practical day-to-day reasons that I think it's important, because, scripture talks about this too, that it's like, he's not someone who doesn't relate. Mm-hmm. He was tempted in every way that you were tempted.
Is that in Hebrews?
Yeah.
That you don't have a high priest that can't.
Yeah, he can relate. Mm-hmm. He is relatable. He suffered like you suffered. He gets it. He is not some aloof God out there somewhere who mm-hmm. doesn't get it. I mean, there's an emotional, relational thing to, like, this was Jesus not just pretending and not just kind of like, standing there on a cross making an illusion.
Right.
Oh, look, he's bleeding, and he's actually,
Well, and having someone relatable, I mean, you could put that into any human experience of, like, I would rather my mom go and plead on my behalf for a lot of things than some random person who doesn't know me. Mm-hmm. Someone who is related and knows my experience, or someone who's also, like, if I sent an accountant to go plead for something for my media business, they're not going to get it right.
Right.
But I'd rather have another videographer go stand in my place to plead for whatever thing. So I think that actually does matter a ton, that someone that can relate, as he now is our mediator between us and God, that he has experienced what we've experienced. He just didn't succumb to the things that we did.
Yeah, it's not an abstract theological concept at this point. It is something that makes sense theologically, that a person had to die for us on our behalf, just like Adam sinned on all of our behalves. Mm-hmm. And Paul talks about it. If one person like this can sin and mm-hmm. death spreads to everybody, how much more if Jesus, capital J, Jesus, mm-hmm. also a man, this man dies for everybody. It's like it shows, like, because Jesus is on a different level than Adam, mm-hmm. but a dude can have this level of impact, then to just think about what Jesus, who's also a man, but is also a peer, what level of impact his death can have.
Right.
And so it has deep theological significance in that it allows him to be the sacrifice in the same way that him being God allows his sacrifice to be sufficient for everyone. But again, at a more practical level, he gets it, right? I mean, there's a whole campaign right now that
he gets us.
Yeah,
and it's what it's called.
It's mildly controversial, at least in Christian circles, of whether or not, like,
it's so random. It's not like on like you watch Hulu and it has ads. And it feels like you've seen the same ad every single time, and then it randomly pops up. But it's not like a consistent.
I watched 4 days of basketball a couple weeks ago, and it was 5 or 6 commercials on loop the whole weekend.
Yeah.
So. Anyways,
I feel does it also matter that we needed someone to come and, I guess, set us in the right direction spiritually? That, like, because he was a teacher, he wasn't just like a symbol. He did come and teach and correct our ways and show us how to live this life. We needed a perfect representation of what we should be doing to pursue a relationship with God, to live life with the right priorities, to, you fill in the gaps. But we'd had teachers before that, but we needed a teacher to come and solidify and say, this is it.
Someone who can, in words that we understand, show us and tell us the way that we should live. I mean, like, I talk about this from time to time. It's like when the disciples, they were followers of Jesus, and in the most literal sense of that word.
Right.
Jesus was here, they were here,
followed.
whatever, here, and they followed him.
Yeah.
Right? And but then after that, through the Great Commission, he says, this is what it looks like to follow me when you can't literally follow me anymore. And it's like, hey, teach them the things that I taught you. Live the life I lived. Teach them to live that life that I lived. And so again, just a very tangible, practical example.
Yeah.
I think it is relationally important. I think his example was important. Like I said, I think it helps us.
It was almost like I don't mean this in a negative way, or I guess kind of, but we needed someone to condescend to get to our level.
Condescend is a very appropriate use of that word.
Okay.
We give it a negative connotation, but that is an appropriate use of that word. And again, Abigail, a great segue into next episode.
Thank you.
We will
talk here all week.
We will talk about his condescending, or in the Greek, the kenosis that he did
That's what I was gonna say. I just didn't say it.
Right. Well, I mean, this is not a Greek podcast. It's an English podcast. So you use an appropriate English word.
Thank you.
Of course, to help us segue. So we understand that Jesus is fully God and why that is of significance. It is significant because it makes his sacrifice possible. And also it makes us even beyond just a sacrifice. It helps us know, like, okay, well, whatever problems I have, this Jesus can fix.
Yeah.
I don't have, like, I wonder if Jesus, no, I mean, he can do it. He can do it in the same way as humanity allows him to be our sacrifice. And also we have an advocate who gets us. So how can those two things coexist? And what is the process by which what we call the incarnation, he became a person, again, in Philippians 2, referred to as a kenosis. And then the fancy word, how these two things go together, hypostatic union. So we will define all of those terms, and Abigail will be given a quiz in the following episode. So encourage you to come back and join us as we kind of talk about kind of how these two natures work together and what was the incarnation like. And again, I hope that you've been tracking with us throughout this series in systematic theology. And if you have any questions, you can go to thegrovechurch.org/connect, and we will get them in our next Q&A. And if you have any desire of getting better connected at the church, learning more about us, again, that's a great place to go. Again, I'm Charlie Lofton, lead pastor at The Grove. Got Abigail Boone here, and thanks for joining us. Thank you for listening to the Cultivate podcast. Our hope is that you are taking steps to go deeper in your faith, that you are asking big questions and you're looking for answers. We hope that we can be a resource for you through our podcast and any other way that we can help you. You can find all our episodes anywhere that you can find podcasts, including YouTube. And again, thank you so much for joining us.